What is going on, folks? My name is Spice. This is Spice Can't Fish, and today we are finally doing it. I'm sucking it up. I'm just gonna do it. Today we're going over my entire swim bait arsenal going into the 2024 season. I've got a ton of new swim baits that I just added to the arsenal, a ton of old swim baits that I've been stockpiling over the last few years. I usually do one of these videos every single year just to show you guys all the new baits that I've accumulated over the past year, give you guys an updated tour of all the swim baits that I have. And every single year the video gets a little bit longer, the swim bait arsenal gets a little bit more extensive. This year I think we've got 61 baits total as well as 4 rods and reels. So we're going to get right into it. This is going to be a super long video. My plan is hopefully to give you guys a little bit of a background, a little bit of information on each of the baits, tell you guys a little bit about each of them. I'm going to try my best to get general specs about the baits as right as possible, although I probably won't know all the specs for all these baits, so I'm going to have to look some of them up and probably put them up on the screen for you guys. But yeah, like I said, we got 61 baits and I want to talk about each of them at least a little bit, so we're going to get right into it. Again, this is going to be a super long video. Really hope you guys enjoy this one because I am not going to enjoy filming or editing it. But yeah, I don't really have a great order to go through all this stuff, so I think we're going to start with the soft baits just because that's what I have the least amount of experience with. That's what I throw the least out of all of my different types of baits. Then we're going to go through all the multi-jointed baits, then all my glide baits, then all the wake baits, and we're going to finish off the video talking about the rods and reels that I use to throw these baits on. But yeah, like I said, we're going to go through all the baits, and we'll start off with some of the soft baits. Alrighty, we're going to start off this video by going over just these two little guys right here. These are the exact same bait, exact same color. They are the 10,000 fish headhunter. So these are just like a little micro swim bait. I didn't really know if I should include these into the swim bait unboxing, or the swim bait arsenal tour that is. But they do have like an interior harness, so I guess you can kind of consider these like a micro swim bait of sorts. So figure we may as well just talk about them real quick. But yeah, I haven't thrown these things around at all. I just picked them up recently. I think this is the license to gill color is what they call that, but just a super natural little bluegill color. Kind of interested in throwing these things around at some point during the spawn. I feel like these would be killer little bed fishing baits. I feel like they'd be pretty solid around the pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn especially. But yeah, anytime you see any of those smaller profile bluegill, I think this would be a really great option. So we're definitely going to have to throw these things around, see what they're made of. But yeah, I just recently picked these things up, haven't got a chance to throw them around at all, so definitely really excited to throw these things around at some point in the spring. By the way, before we get into any more of the soft baits, I should probably mention a lot of the soft baits and a couple of the multi-jointed baits I haven't really thrown around all too much. That's just not the type of swim bait fisherman that I am. Most of the time when I'm throwing a swim bait, I'm either throwing a big glide or I'm throwing some sort of a wake bait. So a lot of my soft baits don't really get a lot of love, and the same with a lot of my multi-jointed baits. But it is a goal of mine this year to actually catch a fish on every single swim bait that I have. So hopefully we'll be able to catch a few fish on some of these soft baits, get a little bit more confidence in them, and hopefully you guys will see them on the channel a little bit more. But yeah, getting back into the soft baits, we got some of these little guys. These are Savage Gear swim baits. I don't remember exactly what they're called, but they're just like these little bright white paddle tails. Again, I just got these in like a mystery tackle box unboxing. By the way, if you're interested in seeing any of those mystery tackle box unboxings, I'll leave a whole playlist linked down below for you guys in the description. But yeah, I got these little guys in a little mystery tackle box unboxing. It's actually the same place that I got those little headhunters as well. It's just from a couple little mystery tackle boxes. But these are, again, just a little paddle tail swim bait. Just your standard little jig head swim bait. Again, just a super bright white color. I don't know a whole lot about them, but look pretty lifelike, look pretty solid, and we'll definitely be able to catch some fish on these things in the spring. Alrighty, next up we got some of these little guys. I don't even know who makes these. These are like some saltwater swim bait that I had way back in the day. I used to throw these around for like striper and bluefish and stuff. The saltwater fish seem to like them pretty well. I'm sure largemouth will eat them too. Haven't really thrown them around for largemouth specifically, but again, I have caught a couple of striper on these baits, so I know they definitely work. But yeah, pretty similar to those last little baits, just a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, and a little bit of a different colorway. I don't know, again, who makes these, but they're pretty solid little baits. Again, haven't really thrown them around for largemouth, but I think I should probably be able to get bit on them. Again, the stripers seem to like them, and a fish is a fish. They're probably all going to eat a little swim bait if they're somewhat predatory, so this thing will definitely get bit at some point or another. Alrighty, another little swim bait that I have right here. Again, I don't really know who makes this one, to be honest, but just like an all-white little swim bait. Should be perfect for imitating a little shad. Just got a couple of these guys, got one rigged up, and then obviously an extra one unrigged there. But again, haven't thrown these around all too much, haven't caught any fish on them. They've just been kind of sitting in my tackle box. But again, these are another one of those baits that I think I'll probably be throwing around at some point this spring, and got a couple of ponds in particular that these things should definitely get bit at. So definitely going to throw them around a little bit, see what we can do with them. Alrighty, next up is another bait, very similar to that last bait. This one I actually do know who makes it though. This is the Optimum Baits. I believe it's the Boom Boom Shad. This is just a little unweighted line through swim bait. It's actually got a little line through system that comes out through the belly. You're supposed to throw a little treble hook on the bottom right there, but that's designed by Fred Rumbanis. It's just a little soft plastic bait. I have been bit on this thing once or twice, haven't caught any fish on it unfortunately, but I've heard some really good things about them. Again, I've been bit on them, so I know they get bit. It's just a matter of me hooking up with one and actually just putting the time in to get bit on this thing and catch a couple of fish on it. But it's a super soft little bait, got some fantastic action in the water and a super natural presentation overall, so definitely excited to get this one in the water a little bit more, see if we can get bit on that come springtime. Alright, now we're going to move on to probably my favorite soft plastic swim bait that I have. These are a couple little unique weedless gills. So these are actually supposed to be, as you guys can probably tell, just little bluegill imitators. This is a little crappie color right there, and then we've also got this copper gill color as well. But yeah, these little things are sweet. I've caught a bunch of fish on them, probably like 4 or 5 on this one and then a couple on this one as well. Really sweet little baits though, like I said. Out of all the soft plastic baits that I have, these are probably the two that I've thrown the most. Probably caught the most fish on this color, but again, both of them are really solid little colors right there. And I remember these things being pretty low key for a while. They started popping off as of recently, so they're starting to get a little bit difficult to get your hands on, but they are really sweet little baits if you can get your hands on them. And they're not super expensive either. I think they come in like a 2-pack for like 25 bucks or 30 bucks or something like that, so pretty solid little baits for a good price. And yeah, these things get bit. They're super versatile as well, which is something that I really like. They're weedless, so you can throw them around cover pretty well, and they're actually designed to be drug along the ground like a jig. You can obviously swim them back like a normal swim bait, but again, they were designed to be kind of drug along the bottom like a jig. So if you just kind of let it sit there, it'll kind of sit up straight like this, and you can just drag it along the bottom super slow like that. But yeah, super versatile little baits. Again, probably the swim bait there, the soft plastic swim bait that I throw the most out of all of these. Caught a bunch of fish on them. Really excited to throw them around a little bit more this spring and catch a few more. And yeah, I probably should pick up a few more of these. Like I said, I have caught a few fish on them and they're starting to get a little bit beat up, so probably could use a couple more in the arsenal. But for right now, we're going to work with these two, and hopefully I won't break them up or lose them all too much. Alrighty, next up, we got ourselves a few of these guys. These are obviously the Megabass Mag Drafts. Picked up a few different colors of these recently. I've thrown the Mag Drafts around a little bit, caught a couple of fish on them here and there, but haven't really had a ton of success, again, just because I don't spend a whole lot of time throwing these soft baits. But since it's something that I want to learn a little bit more, and I know that the Mag Drafts work, they are obviously the industry standard after all, I figured I may as well pick up a few of them since they were on sale at the local Dick's Sporting Goods. So we got 3 different colors. We got one of like more of a bright white color for some dirtier water. Then we got a little bit more of a natural shad color right there. And then last but not least, we got my favorite color here. This is the brownie color. Again, very natural shad, just a little bit more of a brown back. I just tend to lose the mag dress before I end up catching a whole bunch of fish on them, but hopefully we'll be able to keep these ones around. Again, I'll be throwing them around on the kayak a lot more, so hopefully I'll be able to go get them back if I get them snagged. But yeah, I got a few mag drafts to play around with. Again, I haven't really thrown them around all too much, but I'm excited to really see what they can do. Alrighty, next up we got ourselves a few of these guys. If you guys know swim baits, y'all already know what you're looking at, but I do actually own a couple of the Citizens. We got one of the 6-inch and then a couple of the 7-inch working class Zero Citizens. I don't remember exactly what colors these are called. I believe this is the Misfit color. It's kind of like a lighter brown on top and then a darker brown on the bottom, but we've also got this one, which I don't exactly remember what it's called, but it's essentially just like a super natural shad color. Got like a darker gray on the back and then a lighter gray with some black flake in the belly. Now, I've thrown the Citizen a good amount. I've caught a couple of fish on them. I've got bit a whole bunch on them, but they are just kind of like a bigger profile bait, and I noticed that I've been having, or have at least had in the past, a little bit of an issue hooking up on these things. But I think that more has to do with me not knowing what I'm doing with these big soft baits than anything else. I think I'm just super trigger happy when it comes to these big baits. I just like to set the hook as soon as I get bit. But as anyone who throws these big soft baits a whole lot knows, you're actually supposed to let the fish eat it a little bit as opposed to just swinging as soon as you feel that bite. So just kind of have to dial myself back a little bit, wait a little bit longer, and then hopefully I'll be able to land a few more fish on these things. But yeah, regardless, they are really sweet little baits. Again, I just haven't really thrown them around all too much and spent a whole lot of time learning them. But they are one of the most sought after soft baits on the market, and I'm really excited to have some in my arsenal. Again, just wish I threw them around a whole lot more, but we're going to try and change that this year. Alright, this next bait isn't really a swim bait, but it is a soft bait and it is pretty big, so we're going to mention it. This is a Toxic Baits froglet, or frog. I don't really know exactly what they call this thing, but it's like this massive buzz toad style bait. Thing is about as big as my hand. This thing is absolutely massive. Again, I don't remember exactly what they call this thing. I don't even know what they call the color. Now, I didn't actually buy this bait. My buddy Wyatt was nice enough to give it to me. I guess he wanted a giveaway and he wasn't going to use it, so he figured he may as well give it to me since he figured I was going to get some more use out of it. I haven't thrown it nearly at all. The first time I hooked it up or rigged it up, I actually burst through the belly and tore up the nose a whole bunch. So I haven't really had a chance to throw it, but I just recently picked up some more Mendit, so we're going to throw some Mendit on this thing, get it all back to a working condition, and hopefully throw it around this spring and summer, see if we can catch ourselves a few fish on this absolutely monster frog. But yeah, as you can imagine, it's just like the biggest buzz toad that you've ever seen. This thing's just got a crazy loud action. Picture a buzz toad, but just massive. That's essentially what this thing is, but really interesting bait. I don't really have a ton of confidence on buzz toads in general, so an upsized version of that is just not something that I find myself throwing all too much. But again, I want to catch a fish on every single swim bait that I own this year, so we're gonna have to put some time in with this thing, see if we can't get bit on it at some point. Alrighty, I got a couple of these big old beasts right here. I don't even know who poured these up for me, but these are like a custom poured swim bait. I think you could probably just buy this mold off of a couple of different sites if you really wanted to. But yeah, these are just some massive old swim baits. I think they're 9 or 9.5 inches. Just kind of like a bass color or a baby bass color. Just kind of like a subtle green on the back with some blue flake in there, and then just like a nice natural pale shad color on the bottom. Really natural looking color though. Again, I got these poured up for me like years and years ago. Never really threw them around all too much. They have kind of a muted action to them, so they're pretty good over the summer when you can fish them a little bit faster, but in the winter when you're trying to fish these big soft baits kind of slow, they don't really have a ton of action back there in the tail. I might mess around with one of them, kind of shave down the tail a little bit, see if I can get it to get a little bit more action in the winter, but overall just haven't really thrown these things around. I think these are probably the baits that I've thrown around the least out of all of my soft baits. But yeah, like I said, we're catching a fish on every single swim bait that we own this year, so you guys will at least be seeing a little bit of this thing this year. Alrighty, and the last soft bait that I own is this big old thing right here. I recently picked this up. This is a Nate's Baits. It's a 9.5 inch trout. I don't remember what they call this. I think it's like a blue stalker color, but yeah, just that 9.5 inch massive trout profile. He makes a few different sizes of these baits. He makes like a 7.5 inch size, which is a little bit smaller. And I think he also makes like an 11 inch size, which is just ridiculous. I don't know why you would need an 11 inch long soft bait. But yeah, I figured the 9.5 inch was probably about the biggest size that I could reasonably expect to get bit on around here. So picked up just one of them. They are kind of expensive in terms of soft baits. I think they're about 60 bucks for one of them, but they are a super lifelike soft bait, and I hear they're fantastic, especially this time of the year when the water is super cold. So we're gonna take this thing out pretty soon here, tie it up on one of my big old swim bait rods, and see if we can't get bit on it. Alrighty, now on to the multi-jointed baits. We're going to start off with these two little micro guys. So again, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to include these into the swim bait arsenal video, but they are technically swim baits, so we're going to talk about them real quick. But we got one over here that I've used a whole bunch, and one over here that I haven't used at all. They're essentially the same bait though. These are the Ketchko / Mike Buka Baby Bull Gill and Baby Bull Shad. And these are essentially just the downsized version of Mike Buka's Bull Gill and Bull Shad. These things work super well, or at least the Bull Gill does from my experience. I've caught a bunch of fish on this little Bull Gill. It's a sweet little bait for going around small ponds and stuff like that. Haven't had a chance to throw the Bull Shad yet, but if it works as good as the Bull Gill does, I'm sure it'll be a killer little bait. It's just more of a shad style presentation, as you could probably imagine from Bull Shad being the name. It's a little bit more of like a slender body profile as opposed to the Bull Gill, which is a little taller and fatter. But yeah, again, killer little baits. I've caught a few fish on the Bull Gill, like I said. Haven't caught anything on the Bull Shad because I just picked one up, but yeah, really excited to throw these things around in the spring. They're going to be some killer spring baits, especially around that spawn post-spawn time of the year. Alrighty, up next we've got this little guy. This is the Guggen Baits Contender, or the Junior Contender, I guess. This is their little multi-jointed swim bait that they came out with over the last few years. I don't know what color they call that. I guess it's just like their natural gill color. The color honestly looks pretty solid. I haven't really heard a whole bunch about these contenders. I hear they're kind of gimmicky from what I understand. I picked one up a long time ago. Out of the box, it didn't have any action whatsoever, but I don't know if that was just a dud or not, so I figured since we got another one in one of those mystery tackle box unboxings, may as well throw it around a little bit this coming spring. Maybe we'll do a review video on it, or maybe we'll just take it out and test it out a little bit, see what we can do on it. Regardless though, got ourselves a little contender. I'm at least interested to see what this thing does in the spring. As you guys know, I'm not the biggest Baits fan. I don't use their baits a whole ton. I think they're fine, they're just a little overpriced and you don't really get to use them for that long. I think they're fine, they definitely catch fish. I just think they're a little bit overpriced for what they are. And I feel like they don't last super long either, especially their soft baits. Not my favorite baits on the market, but definitely not the worst ones on the market either. But regardless, we got ourselves one of the little junior contenders. And it feels kind of sacrilegious talking about this bait right after the contender, but next up we got the little 6 cents trace right here. This is a little bit of a bigger swim bait. I think it's about 1.5 ounces, a little bit more than 1.5 ounces or something like that. We're finally getting away from the micro baits and getting into some actual swim baits here, so pretty sweet little bait right there. I think this is about a $35 bait, so pretty inexpensive in terms of big swim baits. I got this bait right when it came out. I did a little unboxing and first impressions video on this bait like years and years ago, but it is one of the better videos, or most watched videos on my channel, I should say. Haven't really thrown it around all too much since that original video, but it is a sweet little bait. Again, I just don't really throw multi-jointed swim baits all too much. But yeah, this is just one of their bluegill colors. Super, super lifelike, as you guys can tell. The tail on this one is, as you guys can also see, starting to melt. This is actually the better of the two tails. The original tail that came in the back of this thing actually completely melted and pretty much just turned into a puddle in the back of my car, so I had to swap it out for the less melted tail. But regardless, I think I should still probably try and pick up a couple extra tails for this thing because this one's not in great shape either. But regardless, pretty solid little bait for a beginner swim baiter. Again, I don't really throw multi-jointed swim baits all too much, but this is definitely a great little option. Alright, we're going to talk about this guy next real quick. This is a Sebile Magic Swimmer. This is actually, again, one of my saltwater baits that I used to use for striper and bluefish and stuff like that. It is kind of a medium sink, so I don't really throw it all too much in fresh water, but great little saltwater bait. Again, just kind of like a multi-jointed swim bait. And it would definitely catch largemouth as well. I just don't really throw it around. Again, like I said, a lot of my ponds are super, super shallow, and this thing sinks a little bit too fast to throw around in a lot of those bodies of water. But it does have a killer action on it. It's got some interesting hooks on it as well. Again, it is a saltwater bait, so it's got like these weird like micro frog hooks on the back. I've never really seen a hook like this before, but it's like almost a treble hook, but it's missing one of the treble hook bits on it. It's very strange. But yeah, just another saltwater bait that kind of made its way into my freshwater swim bait arsenal. Not something that I use a whole ton, but definitely one that I keep around just in case. Alrighty, the last two multi-jointed swim baits that I have are actually pretty cool, so we're going to get into these real quick. This is a Matt Lures hard bass. So Matt Lures is generally known for their hard gill, which is their three-piece hard bluegill swimmer. But they've also got this little bass profile, which is super, super lifelike, really sweet as well. I think this is technically supposed to be a smallmouth pattern, but kind of looks like a largemouth or a smallmouth, just kind of like an ambiguous bass profile. Regardless though, I'm really excited to throw this thing around. I got it towards the end of the year last year, so I didn't really get a chance to toss it around too much. But it does have some pretty solid action on it, and I am very excited to throw it around a little bit more, especially coming around the spawn post-spawn time of year. With that super, super lifelike profile and the really lifelike paint job as well, this thing's going to get absolutely crushed. Again, don't really have too much to say about it. It's just one of those more recent baits that I've picked up and haven't really thrown around too much, but it's definitely going to get some time in the water this coming season, and we're definitely going to catch a couple of fish on it. Alright, and the last multi-jointed swim bait that I have right here is this little guy. This is the Throwback Baits Flea Shad. I love the Throwback Baits stuff. I actually picked up one of their wake walkers last year when they did a collaboration with SWIMBAIT Underground. They did a couple of super lifelike paint jobs, so I ended up picking up one of the bluegill ones. Absolutely crushed some fish on it last year. Caught a bunch of fish, caught a couple of really nice fish on that wake walker. And so I decided to pick up a couple more of their baits this past winter. If you guys saw my recent swim bait unboxing, I actually picked up a couple. If not, I'll leave that link down below if you guys want to go check it out, but you'll see all those baits in this video if you keep watching anyway. But yeah, this is one of my most recent pickups. I'm really excited to get my hands on one of these things. Again, I don't really throw multi-jointed swim baits around, very similar to the soft plastic baits. It's just not something that I find myself throwing all too much, but I wanted to try and get at least a little bit more confidence in it this year, so I picked up a few more, so I would be kind of forced to throw them around a little bit more. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to catch ourselves some nice fish on this thing this year. I've seen a lot of really big fish caught on these flea shads. I've seen a lot of different types of species of fish caught on these flea shads. It seems like just about everything wants to eat them. They're definitely super fishy baits. But yeah, we're just going to have to see what we can do with this thing. Again, I've caught a few fish on the Wake Walker already, so I know that this profile works. And this is pretty much just the lipless version of the Wake Walker. This is a slow floating version, so it will float or stay really close to the surface. And yeah, this is probably one of those baits that I'm most excited to get in the water this coming season. I'm really excited to see what we can do with this little flea shad. Alrighty, now on to something that I have a little bit more confidence in, that being glide baits. We're going to start with the little ones and kind of work our way up in size. Starting off with this little guy. So this is a SWIMBAIT Co. Gremlin. This is the second version, like the 2.0 version of the Gremlin. It's a really small bait, but a pretty expensive bait, especially for the size. I think one of these things will run you about 120 bucks, and it's really not all that much when you look at it. It's a really small bait. I think it's like 1.2 ounces, so really manageable. You could throw it on a heavy jig rod if you really wanted to. And yeah, it's kind of like a small little micro chopper style bluegill glide. I really like this thing. I've caught a few fish on it here and there. I think probably 5 or 6 fish on it so far. It's a super erratic bait. Like I said, it's kind of mainly just like a chopper style bait. You can burn it back, but it does get a little bit like wobbly in the retrieve. And yeah, I just noticed that I get the best reactions with this thing when I'm just kind of popping it with the rod tip. Very similar to how you would fish a jerkbait. And yeah, just think of this thing as kind of like a micro Chad shad. Again, it's just like a really small chopping style glide bait. Very erratic, super fun little bait to fish. Super good little bait for ponds, clear water fisheries, stuff like that. I've caught small fish on it, I've caught big fish on it. This thing just gets bit. Alrighty, next up, this is actually a really inexpensive bait. This is the Thunderhawk Lures Cha-Cha Glide. It's a little like $16 or $17 swim bait. Again, super manageable. I think it's like 1.5 ounces, so again, you could throw it on kind of a heavier jig rod or a flipping stick or something like that if you really wanted to. But yeah, for the price, this is a pretty solid little bait. It's one of those baits that I think goes under the radar. A lot of people talk about budget swim baits and they talk about the River to Sea S-Waver. This thing, I think, beats the S-Waver in every category. But this thing is less expensive. It's got a better action. You got a little bit more consistent, wider glide to it. It's a little bit more true to a real glide bait as opposed to a bait that you just chuck and wind like the S-Waver. I like the profile of it a little bit more. Again, it's a little bit of a cheaper bait, so it's a little bit less expensive. The hardware that comes on it is pretty solid as well. I think the one thing that the S-Waver has over this bait is kind of like the quality paint jobs. These baits don't really have super quality paint jobs on them as opposed to the S-Wavers, which tend to have a little bit higher quality coming from River to Sea. That being said though, these Thunderhawk lures do have a solid range of color options. They got some shad colors. This is actually the baby bass color. They've got some red ones. They've got like a bunch of chrome ones. Regardless of what you're trying to imitate, I'm sure they've got a color for it, and they honestly aren't terrible. I just think that River to Seas are like a little bit better. But overall, in comparison between the two baits, I would definitely go with this one over the S-Waver any day of the week. Again, I've caught a few fish on this thing. I don't really throw it around as much anymore just because I've got a bunch of other glide baits, which you guys will see up here in a second. But it is a pretty solid little bait. Again, I do like to throw it around from time to time, especially in some smaller bodies of water. And if you're on a budget and you really want to start learning some of those glide baits, this is a great option for you guys. Okay, next up is another recent acquisition for me. This is a DRT Tiny Clash. As you guys probably know, this is one of the best known baits on the market at the moment. I've got a couple of the Clash 9s. I've had them for a few years. I just never pulled the trigger on the Tiny Clash. For whatever reason, I feel like I catch them well enough on the regular size Clash that I don't really need to go for the smaller version. But I saw this armor color brand new in box for like less than 100 bucks, so I figured I may as well pick it up. Again, I've always kind of wanted a Tiny Clash. I find that I catch a lot of fish on the Clash 9, so never really felt the need to pick up the smaller version. That being said though, now that I have one, I'm pretty stoked to throw it around. I've seen people catch a ton of fish on these things. I've seen my buddies catch fish on them right next to me while I haven't been getting bit. They're cool little baits for sure. Again, I really like the Clash 9s, and these are just the smaller version, so this should be a fun little bait to throw around this spring as well. And honestly, this bait could get bit coming up here in a little bit, so you guys might even see this within the next few fishing videos. I don't know if I'm going to be putting up a ton of fishing content here coming up, but hopefully within the next few weeks I'll be able to put up a couple of fishing videos. I think a few of the lakes are starting to thaw out a little bit. We've been getting a little bit of a warm streak here, so hopefully they'll thaw out and just stay thawed. And hopefully you guys will be able to see a little bit of fishing content here coming up pretty soon. But regardless, we'll be able to throw this thing around pretty much early spring all the way throughout the year. Alrighty, next up we got another bait that should be perfect for this time of the year. This is the Roman Made Negotiator. Now, Roman Made is actually that one company for me. I think a lot of people have like one company where they want all their baits, or they have like such high respect for them. A lot of people will say Throwback or DRT or something like that, but for me it's Roman Made. I think Roman Made is kind of that pinnacle bait company for me. They're all handmade in Japan. Each one of them is custom tuned, custom painted, custom sanded in the whole 9 yards. I am really excited to have quite a few of these Roman maids in the arsenal, and this is one of my favorites. The Negotiator, for those of you guys don't know, is kind of like the smaller, downsized version of the Mother. The Mother is obviously the massive one, which you guys will see here in a little bit, but we also have the smaller Negotiator, which is kind of the more normal bite-sized profile size. And these things are really sweet little baits. Again, they're kind of just like a straight chuck and wind. The way that you fish the Negotiator, as well as how you fish the Mother, is you just cast it out there, you reel it back to you, and then every once in a while you just give it a hard reel bump, and that makes the bait shoot out to one side. But yeah, these are very simple baits to fish. I feel like people overcomplicate them. They try and glide them like a normal glide bait, and they don't really do that super well. But if you know how to properly use these things, they are fantastic baits, and I am really excited to throw this thing around coming up here soon in a little bit. Again, this is one of those baits that you can throw when the water is super cold and still hopefully get bit on it. Alrighty, continuing on with the Roman made baits, we've also got a South right here. So this is like their bluegill style bait. Again, this is a handmade bait by those guys over in Japan. This is just their bluegill profile. Like I said before, it's a little bit taller, a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter as well than the Negotiator. This is also a topwater bait, but it is a glide bait as well, so it does kind of twitch. It's a really interesting bait. I still have to throw it around and get a little bit more of a feel for it, but I have caught a few fish on it. Actually, if you guys want to see my first impressions video for this bait, I'll leave that link down below for you guys as well. That was a pretty fun little video. I took this thing out in like the end of October, beginning of November or something, and caught a bunch of topwater fish on it. It was just a quick afternoon sesh after work one day, but caught a few fish on this thing and definitely had a great time, so we'll definitely be throwing it around at some point here coming up in the future. But yeah, really cool little bait. Again, just don't think it's something that a lot of people see. When people think of Roman made, they usually think of the Negotiator and the Mother. Some people think of the Trick. Not a lot of people think of the South. It's one of those underappreciated Roman made baits. But again, another one that I wanted to add to the arsenal, and I'm really stoked that I got it. Alrighty, another topwater bluegill style bait. This is actually a bait Sanity. This is, I believe, their antidote gill is what they call that. I'm not 100% sure, but that's their little topwater gill, or I guess their glide gill. They got a couple of different sink options for these things. This is, again, like I said, the floating version, so it does stay on or close to the top of the water. They've also got a slow sink, and then I think a medium sink as well. They do give you some weight strips and stuff to add to the belly of this thing to make it a slow sink if you want the floating version to actually slow sink or suspend or something like that, but I've just kept mine as a normal floater. And these are pretty fun little baits. I've caught quite a few fish on these things. I think I've caught probably 7 or 8 fish on it, I want to say. Only thrown it around a few times, but it seems like it's got some pretty solid action. And a lot of the bait Sanity baits aren't super expensive. This one is actually on the more expensive side from what I can tell, but I think it's only about 60 bucks or so. So in terms of swim baits, it's really not super expensive. Again, a great little package, great little profile for this bait, and it's got some good action to it as well. These things come with a couple of different tail options, so you can swap the tails out on them, which is super sick. I've just got the normal style tail with the little chartreuse tips on it just to make it look a little bit more lifelike. But yeah, that's a super cool little bait. Just not something that I throw around a whole bunch. Again, I just don't find myself tossing this bait around for whatever reason, but it is a super fun little bait when I throw it around, and definitely gets bit. Alrighty, next up we got another almost forgotten about bait, I feel like. This is the Depths Bull Shooter. They've got a few different sizes of these things. I think this is the 160 size or whatever the bigger size of this bait is. And these things are so incredibly lifelike. This is one of those baits that I saw when I was a younger angler. Looked at it and was like, that's crazy. It looks exactly like a bluegill. Like if any fish was going to eat any sort of bluegill bait, a fish would eat this one. I remember looking at them and seeing that they were like 120 bucks and thinking that was a ridiculous price for a fishing lure. They don't ever seem to go for that price. If you see them secondhand, I think you usually can find them for about 40 or 50 bucks, which isn't too bad for these things. And yeah, I think they're kind of an unappreciated bait. I think a lot of people caught fish on them in the past, but just as of recently with the huge influx of different bluegill style glide baits on the market, people just kind of forget about some of the OG baits. And I'm definitely one of those people. I feel like I don't appreciate this thing, or definitely don't throw it around as much as I should. The hooks on this thing are a little bit rusty at the moment, so we're definitely going to have to swap these things out before we throw this bait around, but we are definitely going to throw it around at some point this spring, see if we can catch a few more fish on it. I think I've only caught like 2, maybe 3 fish on the Bull Shooter for whatever reason. Again, it's just not a bait that I throw around a whole bunch. It is a little bit of a faster sink rate for what I'm used to or what I like in a bluegill style glide bait. And it is kind of a difficult bait to get gliding. It is kind of more of just like a chuck and wind style glide bait, which are kind of the two reasons why I don't throw it around as much, but definitely still gets bit. It's a super, super lifelike bait. And if the right fish sees this thing go past it, it's definitely going to take a swipe at it. Okay, and this is kind of what I like to think of as the more refined version of the bull shooter. This is the 86 Baits Tempest scale. So very similar to the bull shooter, even more lifelike patterns on it. This, I believe, is the reddier color. The bull shooter is obviously more of a translucent bait, where this is just a straight matte finish. It is a resin bait, so it's just made out of like that white resin material, and then just got kind of like a printed bluegill reddier pattern on it. But this thing is incredibly lifelike. It's a super slow sink. It glides super, super easily. Fantastic little bait. I absolutely love this thing. It is one of my more expensive baits and one of my harder baits to get your hands on, so I don't really find myself throwing it around all that much. Again, I get really nervous throwing around some of these bigger, like more expensive swim baits, but I think I just kind of have to suck it up and throw this thing around a little bit more because it definitely gets bit. I just haven't really put the time in with it. Again, it's just kind of sat in my collection. It's something that I look at from time to time and I'm like, man, I'm really stoked that I have it, but I don't feel like I throw it as much as I should. So hopefully this year we'll be able to get some more rash on this thing and make it look a little bit more used. Alrighty, and this is my last little bluegill bait right here. This is a Top Banana Lures bluegill. It's just their glide gill. My buddy Dan actually makes these. He was nice enough to make this for me like a few years ago. But it's a handmade wooden hand-carved bait. Really like this thing. It's got a supernatural glide to it. Again, very similar to the bull shooter, where it's kind of hard to get it to actually glide side to side. But if you just chuck it and wind it, this thing looks absolutely killer in the water. I don't find myself throwing this thing around all too much. It is a very heavy bait. I think it's about 5.5 to 6 ounces. So this bait being about the same size as the bull shooter, but almost twice the weight, it's a really heavy piece of wood. Again, it is made out of wood, so it is going to be a little bit heavier, a little bit more dense and stuff like that. But regardless, super, super heavy bait for the size. And yeah, I just haven't spent a whole lot of time throwing this thing around, but we're definitely going to spend some more time with it coming up this spring and summer. I'm really excited to see what this thing can do. I can feel it catching a big one for me. I just haven't put the time in to actually get bit on this thing a whole bunch. That being said though, I have caught one fish on it, and the one fish that I caught on it was a pretty decent one. So definitely has some good big fish mojo. We're just going to have to see if we can get out and actually catch a couple more decent ones on it. Alrighty, now we're going to talk about these two guys. These are the same bait, they're just two different colorways. This is the Zimmer Bait Co. 8-inch instigator. So this is their medium size instigator. They've also got a 6-inch size, which is a little bit smaller and thinner, and then a 10-inch size, which is pretty similar in terms of like actual body structure, just a little bit bigger. But yeah, this is kind of the medium size. This is the 8-inch. I've got two of these. I bought this one, and then the paint on this one obviously is wearing off really, really badly. That actually started when I only caught like 1 or 2 fish on the thing, so I actually reached out to the guys over at Zimmer Bait Co., and they were nice enough to send me a replacement. So we got 2 now. Again, I didn't buy both of these baits. I only bought one of them, but we got 2 of them. This one is a little bit more of like a golden shiner pattern, which you probably can't tell because most of the paint's falling off of it. But I don't honestly mind it. It kind of just makes it look like a beat up golden shiner. So we're going to keep throwing it until it doesn't have any paint on it. And then we've got this more natural like thread fin shad color, just kind of like a bright white right there. Super, super lifelike, super natural pattern on both of these things. I gotta say, I really like this new replacement one, the white like thread fin shad color. That shad dot on there is super interesting. It's not like an actual circle. It's kind of just more of like a splotch, which makes it look a little bit more natural. But yeah, fantastic little baits. I really like these things. They're kind of like a perfect mix in between like a chopper style glide bait and then just like a normal glide. These things are kind of like the perfect like budget, which I'm putting in quotes, glide bait. If you guys are looking for like a taller shad style glide bait, these things are fantastic. I think they'll run you about 120 bucks or so, but in the grand scheme of things, they're really not super expensive. But yeah, I got a couple of these guys in a couple of different colorways, and really excited to throw these things around this spring, see if we can catch a few more fish on them. Alrighty, another bait that I have 2 of, we're going to talk about these guys here. These are the DRT Clash 9s. So I briefly talked about these before when I was talking about the Tiny Clash, but these are obviously the bigger version of the Tiny Clash. I've got 2 of these things. I'm not entirely sure why, but I've got one that's kind of more for like a cloudy situation and then one more for sunny situations. So it's got kind of like this matte bass color, which is perfect for super, super clear water, or if it's like super cloudy out, you don't want anything with any sort of reflection on it. That's a great color there. And then we've got like this custom painted like shad carp, crappie, bass kind of color. It's just like a super ambiguous color presentation right there, but it's got a bunch of shine to it, so that one I like to throw around when it's a little bit brighter, sunnier out. And especially if the water's a little bit dirtier and it's sunny out, that's a great option right there. If it's a little bit darker and dirty, then this one's got enough flash with that bright white belly that I can get away with throwing that. But if it's a sunny day, I especially like to throw this thing right here. But generally, cloudy days I'll throw this one, sunny days I'll throw this one. Other than that, they're exactly the same bait. The Clash 9s are super sweet. These things are kind of like the do-it-all bait is kind of how they were designed. They come with a bunch of different lips as well as a bunch of different tails. Each lip and tail gives the bait a different action. I think overall there's like 32 or 36 different combinations that you can do to give the bait all different types of action. There's parts to make it fish like a wake bait, there's parts that make it fish down in 20 foot of water, there's parts that make it roll, there's parts that make it glide, there's parts that make it chop. The bait does pretty much everything depending on what you have on it. And yeah, I love these things. I think I probably used the bass one a little bit more than I used the bright custom color one, but they both definitely get bit. But yeah, as you guys can probably tell, that bass one is absolutely destroyed. This one less so, but definitely still has a few little hook rash marks over here. This one less so, definitely has some hook rash on it, but the bass one has definitely gotten beaten up a whole bunch. Alrighty, next up, going from a Japanese bait to an American one. This is the 6 Sense Draw. This is the other 6 Sense glide bait that I have. This is actually one of the original runs of the draw as well. I got on this drop as soon as it came out. This is the 4K shad color. I absolutely love this bait. It's not a super easy bait to work. It definitely takes some time to throw this thing around. The first couple of times I took this thing out, I wasn't entirely sure how to work it. It takes you a little bit to actually get the cadence for this thing right. I have noticed that if you use the rod tip and actually use that to help bump the bait a little bit, it'll help it glide a little bit better. And I've also noticed that the slower this bait is worked, the better it works. But when you get it right, this is an incredibly consistent bait. It stays super level in the water. It's really, really true in that glide. You can get a good like 2.5, 3 foot glide in either direction on this thing. So super, super wide glide on the bait. Again, it's really not super expensive in terms of glide baits. It's about $70 or $75, I think. Comes stocked with incredibly sharp hooks. I think they're BKK hooks, but really, really sharp hooks. I absolutely love this bait, like I think I've said before. I've only caught like 8 to 10 fish on it so far, so haven't used it a whole ton, but it's definitely a bait that I really enjoy throwing when I get around to it. I just don't find myself fishing a ton of places that have these absolutely massive, super long, white shad style bait fish in it. A lot of the main forage around here and most of the ponds and lakes are going to be bluegill. There's some Persian crappie mixed in, but there isn't a whole ton of like shad and alewife and stuff, although there are a couple of ponds that I've found out have like some alewife and such in it. But yeah, like 3.5 ounces, it is a super manageable bait. You could throw this on like a 200 or a 300 size swim bait reel. And yeah, overall, just really excited to throw this thing around a little bit more. Again, haven't really thrown it around too much, only caught a few fish on it, but I can see this thing catching an absolute giant for me coming up this year. Alrighty folks, got 2 more glide baits to talk about, and they are the 2 biggest ones that I own. We're gonna start with this guy right here. This is the Depths 250. I'm sure if you guys know big swim baits, you know what you're looking at right here. But again, Depths 250, it's a slow sink version. This is one of the newer ones. This isn't one of the OG 250s, obviously. But I think I bought this thing for like 60 or 70 bucks or something like that. It was a steal when I bought this thing. Again, a lot of the depths baits I feel like aren't really well known or well received or for whatever reason. They were a big thing back in the day, but I think as of recently with, again, the influx of new baits hitting the market, the depths baits are kind of forgotten about. The same thing that I said with the bull shooter also applies with the slide swimmer 250. I just think it's a bait that people don't think about all too much. Again, there's a ton of other options nowadays. Back in the day when the options were pretty limited and the 250 was kind of like the one and only big glide bait that you can get your hands on, it was a killer bait. Everybody knew about it. Everybody threw it. But these days you don't see them around as much. You don't see people throwing them around or catching fish on them all too much. So I figured I may as well pick one up now that the hype has kind of died down on them, and hopefully we'll be able to stick a few big ones on it. But yeah, like I said, this is the second biggest glide bait that I own at 6.5 ounces. It's not a small bait. It's a really, really big piece of plastic. This thing's really interesting though. Like I said, it is the newer version, so it is made out of that hard plastic, but on the outside it's actually got like a soft rubberized coating on it. It's supposed to help the bait last a little bit longer, help make it feel a little bit more lifelike when a fish hits it as well, so it doesn't just feel like hard plastic all the way around. It's got a a little bit of give to it. This bait's also got like a spring in it, so if you hit it up against some cover, you can actually hear and feel this little spring vibrating in the head of the bait. Supposedly that's supposed to get the fish a little bit more riled up. I haven't caught a fish on this thing to know, so I can't honestly say whether or not that makes the fish want to bite it a little bit more, but we're definitely going to have to try and catch a fish on this thing at some point this year. This is one of the two baits that I especially want to get bit on this year that I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to, but I'm definitely going to put some time aside to just throw this bait as well as the next one that we're going to talk about and see if we can hopefully get bit on these two biggest glide baits that I own finally. And since we're talking about it, we may as well talk about it. This is the biggest glide bait, the biggest bait that I own for that matter. It's definitely the most expensive bait that I own. This is the Roman Made Mother. So you guys saw the Negotiator a little bit ago. You also saw the South. This is kind of like their flagship bait. This is the bait that everybody knows about when they're talking about Roman Made. It's an incredibly big bait. It's massive. I think they're like 10.5 ounces or something like that. A full 12-inch bait. Just absolutely ridiculous. This thing is just way too big for its own good. I just picked this up towards the end of the year. I threw it around a good bit. Never got bit on it towards the end of the year, but I'm hoping this spring we'll be able to put a fish in the boat with this thing. This is probably going to be the biggest challenge when it comes to catching a fish on every single one of these baits. A lot of these other baits I feel very confident in catching a fish on, but this Mother as well as the 250, I'm not as sure. But again, I'm really going to try and set aside some time this year with this bait as well as the 250. Probably just bring this bait with me for a day or two or three or a week or a month or however long it's going to take for me to actually get bit on it. But I will do everything in my power to actually get bit on this thing at some point this year, and hopefully you guys will be able to see a video of that coming up here soon. Alrighty, so we're going to get into the wake baits in just 1 second, but I do have one bait that isn't really a swim bait, but it is a big bait. It's a handmade bait, it's a hand carved bait, and it's from a swim bait company, so we're going to include it. And this bait also means a whole ton to me, so I definitely want to put it in this video as well. This is a Black Dog Bait Company Lunker Punker. So if you guys know anything about the Lunker Punker or any of these big topwater baits, you guys will know that this is one of the most sought after big topwaters or big spooks that you can get your hands on. I'm not really a big spook thrower. I don't throw spooks a whole ton to begin with, and I especially don't throw ones this big very often, but my buddy Jack was nice enough to actually give this to me for a graduation present. I've only thrown it around a couple of times. I've been bit on it once. I had an absolutely monstrous blow up one night, super late at night. The fish came up and spit the hook. I guess it only had one of the treble hooks in it, but unfortunately lost that fish, but I have been bit on this thing once. Again, don't really throw big topwater spooks all that much, but we're definitely going to have to throw this thing around at some point over the summer, see if we can get bit on it. It is an absolutely badass bait though. Again, super big shout out to my buddy Jack for giving this one to me. I'm really excited to have this one in the arsenal. We're definitely going to have to throw it around a whole bunch, see if we can get a giant to come up and actually commit to it. But yeah, it's just like a super natural, like, shad style presentation. Got a bunch of this gold foil stuff on the side of it as well, which looks super cool. I'm not entirely sure if my buddy Jack was the one who painted this. I think he was, but don't quote me on that. But regardless, hand painted little Black Dog Bait Company Lunker Punker. Again, a bait that I don't throw a whole bunch, but one of the ones that means more to me than just about anything else. If I could only keep a handful of baits, this was definitely one of the ones that I would keep, if for no other reason than just the sentimentality of it. I will never get rid of this thing. I hope to hang on to it for as long as possible. I definitely don't want to break it off or lose it, so hopefully we'll be able to keep this one in the arsenal for good. But yeah, super big shout out to my buddy Jack again for this one. Really excited to get it out in the water a little bit more. Again, I just don't really throw big spooks like this all too much, but hopefully coming up this year we'll be able to get on a couple of fish with it. Alrighty, we're going to keep on going with the Black Dog Bait Company baits. This is actually another one that my buddy Jack gave to me. Another bait that has a lot of sentimentality behind it. And this little bait at the moment currently holds my personal best of about 6.7 pounds. So this is a Black Dog Baits G2 shell cracker. Again, my buddy Jack was nice enough to give this one to me as well. This is just a little custom paint job. I believe this is just like their black color or their dark night color or something like that. But my buddy Jack was actually trying to get like a little bit of a red eye thing going on. He only ended up painting one of the eyes. Apparently the paint gun exploded and didn't really work super well, so only one of the eyes is red, but I call this guy Arnold Arnold because it kind of reminds me of that one scene from the Terminator when Arnold's face is all half melted off and one of his eyes is glowing all red. But yeah, this is my little Arnold G2 shell cracker. I absolutely love this thing. Again, call my personal best on it. This is another one of those baits that I think I'll have in the arsenal for hopefully forever. Another one of those sentimental baits that I hope I'll never get rid of. Again, really love the G2 shell crackers. This is kind of the first bait that really kickstarted the whole swim bait obsession for me. Well, not this specific one, actually. The next shell cracker that we're going to talk about in a second is the one that really got me into big swim bait fishing. But regardless, the G2 shell cracker always has a soft spot in my heart. And this thing not only being painted up by my buddy and given to me by him, but also currently holding my personal best, is going to be one of those baits that I just want to hang on to and remember forever. Again, I don't really throw it all too much, but when I do get around to throwing it, the thing definitely gets bit. I've got a couple of fish on it here and there, but again, I usually use the other shell cracker because I don't really want to lose this one. Alrighty, and speaking of, we may as well talk about the other G2 real quick. This is the original bait that got me into the swim bait craze, like I said. I don't know what they call this color. It's just kind of like a weird bluegill color. Most of the paint's kind of coming off of this thing. It could probably use a repaint at some point. But yeah, this is kind of the bait that did it. This is kind of the one that kickstarted the whole swim bait addiction for me. I love these little G2 shell crackers. If you guys are looking for like a good beginner bait, if you can get your hands on these things, they're fantastic. Little small bluegill profile. Again, this is a little bit more of a natural color as opposed to that all black one, which is a little bit more accustomed for dirty water or night fishing. And yeah, this one, as you guys can tell, has seen a lot of fish, a ton of abuse. I've caught probably 20, 30 fish on this little thing right here, and it's still kicking. Definitely needs some new hooks on it, but other than that, this thing is absolutely killing it. And yeah, love the little G2 shell crackers. Like I said before, they're great little baits. Now moving on a little bit, this is the original Black Dog Bait shell cracker. This is the all wooden one. And this is a sweet little bait. These are all handmade, or they used to be all handmade. I don't know if they make the original shell crackers anymore, but they're all made out of wood. The tail on these ones is metal as opposed to plastic like the G2 shell cracker, and they are really sweet little baits. The G2s will get down a foot or two, but these things pretty much want to stay right along the surface. I am really lucky to get my hands on one of these things. Again, they are really difficult to get your hands on. I don't know if they make the wooden ones anymore, and this one in particular was actually painted up by a really well-known painter by the name of Bass Jack. It is a little bit used. I've caught 2 or 3 fish on it, and it was used before I got it, but overall, sweet little bait, and it's going to get rashed up regardless, so I'm not super upset about the fact that it's a little bit messed up. And yeah, worst comes to worst, I could always get this thing repainted if I really wanted to, but overall, really excited to have this supernatural bluegill presentation in the arsenal. And here's just a little comparison for you guys, just in case you're wondering about the size difference. That original shell cracker is a little bit bigger than the G2, but both pretty similar profiles. That shell cracker is just obviously a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, a little bit heavier as well, as you can imagine being a little bigger and also being made out of wood. But yeah, love those little Black Dog baits. Again, I've got 4 of them. A couple of them were given to me, a couple of them I bought myself, but absolutely love the Black Dog baits. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for these things. And they've also got the Bubba shell crackers, which are the really, really big ones. I'd love to get my hands on one at some point, so hopefully you guys will be able to see one of those on the channel at some point. But yeah, for the moment, I'm hoping that these 4 baits will do it for us, and hopefully between these 4, we'll be able to catch ourselves another personal best on one. Alrighty, the next couple of baits are actually another couple of baits that my buddy Dan over at Top Banana Lures made for me. We're going to start off with this little guy. This is his Sugarfoot mouse. Funnily enough, I actually filmed a video with this thing like years ago. It was going to be the next video that I put up on my channel right before my computer died. I used to have this old crappy laptop that I did all my editing on, and for whatever reason it just decided to die right while I was mid-editing this video, so I never got a chance to put it out. But I do have the hard drive for that laptop around here somewhere, so eventually I will hopefully find that. When I do, I'll be able to get all that footage off of that old hard drive, and hopefully we'll be able to have a few old-fashioned videos for you guys. And when I do that, this will probably be the first video that comes out at some point. I've caught probably 5 or 6 fish on this bait. Not a ton of fish. I haven't thrown it around a whole ton, but it's a great little like pocket-sized mouse profile. It's smaller than your average mouse. I think it's only about a 4.5 inch body. Overall, the profile is about 6.5 or 7 inches with the tail, and I think it's only about 1.5 ounce bait. So again, super manageable. One of those baits that you can throw on like a heavier flipping stick if you really wanted to again, but I usually throw these on like my finesse or swim bait combo. But yeah, sweet little topwater mouse style bait right there. Again, just haven't thrown it around all too much, but hopefully you guys will be able to either see that old video or see some new footage on this thing, or hopefully a little bit of both actually. Very similarly, we also have his Wriggle-It Rat, which is his little 3-piece version. That little Sugarfoot Mouse was a 2-piece wake bait. This is the larger 3-piece version. So I think the body on this one's about 6.5 inches without the tail. As you guys can see, there's actually a place for me to put a tail. It just doesn't have a tail on it right now. Usually just use like a Senko or a Zoom finesse worm or something. You just kind of thread it on there and then take a toothpick and shove it through that little eyelet right there to keep it in place. I just happened to lose the tail the last time I was throwing it and never got a chance to put another one on, but next time I take this thing out, we'll definitely throw another tail on that and throw it around a little bit. But it's a cool little bait. Again, it's a 3-piece. It's a little bit bigger. With the tail, it's probably about a 12 or 11 inch profile, so pretty sizable profile right there. But yeah, this is another one of those topwater baits that I definitely want to spend some more time with. I was going to film a video with this thing, but I ended up getting it like super late in the year when I got it, and then just never threw it around all that much last year to film a video on it. But yeah, once water temperatures start getting up over the 60s, we'll start throwing around these little topwater mice and rats and see if we can't link up with a couple of fish on them. Alrighty, another couple of baits from another buddy of mine. These are the Beebs Big Baits Blasters. So this is probably like my first official big swim bait. This is kind of like the original swim bait that I really started throwing around a whole bunch. It's a wake bait, like I said, these are all wake baits, but this is kind of like a wake and crank where it gets down to about 2 foot. And this is a sweet little bait. Again, this is probably like the first true big swim bait that I really got some confidence in. I don't really count the G2 Shellcracker as a big bait because it is kind of like a smaller profile. But this is what you would consider a big swim bait or a big wake bait, I guess. It's about 2.5, 2 3/4 ounces, so definitely a pretty solid size profile. The first day I took this thing out, I think my second or third cast with it, I caught a nice like 3.5 pound fish, and then ever since then it's just been one of my confidence baits. I've been noticing I've been throwing a little bit less and less here and there because I've just got so many other wake baits, as you guys can tell, but these things definitely hold a place in my heart, and I will always have one at least with me, if not always tied on. And Brett, the guy who runs the company, was actually doing a tournament a couple of years ago. I ended up winning that tournament with the biggest fish that was caught out of the 2 weeks that he was running it. And as a part of my prize package, I ended up getting a second Beebs Big Baits. So we've got a second one. This one's painted up by B&A Customs. It's a little bit more of a natural bluegill color, where this is just like their normal green gill. I tend to use this one for a little bit dirtier water and this one for cleaner water. But honestly, you can get bit with both of them, and really any clarity of water is really just more a personal preference thing for me. But I've been bit on this one in like 22-foot visibility, and I've been bit on this one in like 8 inches of visibility. So they both definitely work in both water clarities. I just tend to go for the darker one in the darker water and the more natural one in the clearer water. That's just kind of how I think. But yeah, fantastic little baits. Again, I've caught a ton of fish on these things. I've caught probably 30 fish on the green gill and then probably 6 or 7 on this one. So definitely caught my fair share of fish on these things. They just get bit, and they will continue to get bit. You guys will definitely be seeing these things on the channel coming up here soon, assuming I can get this one out of my finger. Ow. But yeah, as you guys can tell, sticky sharp hooks on these things. I think these ones are actually upgraded hooks. These should be owner ST56s, whereas these ones are just the stock hooks that come on the bait. The stock ones are super sharp. I think I just ended up bending out these ones, so swapped them over to the owners, which are a little bit lighter wire, and I have since started to bend out as well. But regardless, these things are going to get bit in the spring. I am really excited to throw them around again and see if we can get a couple more big fish on them. Alrighty, next up we're going to talk about this guy. This is a Roman-made trick. So this is kind of like the 3-piece version of the Negotiator. It's the same size, pretty much the same profile. It's just got that extra joint in it. They make 2 different styles of the trick. They've got the lipless as well as the lipped version. I believe the lipless version is the slow sink and the lipped version is the floater. And this is kind of like a wake and crank multi-jointed swim bait. It's really weird. You can get it to go down to 5 or 6 foot if you want. You can also get it to wake right along the surface of the water. It's a really interesting bait. This one again came with the lip in it, so it is the floater. They also make a soft lip, so you can like bust this hard lip out and then put a soft lip in it, which is supposed to make it even more weedless, so you can kind of fish it around cover and stuff. I've seen videos of people with the soft lip in this thing literally taking this bait and like jumping it over laydowns without it getting hooked and stuff, so definitely makes it a little bit more weedless if that's something you're looking to do with this bait. But yeah, really interesting multi-jointed 3-piece like wake and crank style bait. I've only caught 1 or 2 fish on a Roman made trick, and it wasn't this one. I actually had another one that I ended up breaking off the first day that I was throwing it. And that was super sad, unfortunately, but we did end up catching a fish on it before I broke it off. So that's nice, I guess. And we did end up getting a second one. Again, these tricks are a little bit easier to get your hands on. They're not super expensive. I think I picked this one up for like 60 or 70 bucks, and they're not super hard to find or super sought after or anything. So if you can find them, they're usually pretty inexpensive. But yeah, like I said, Roman Made's just kind of that pinnacle bait company for me, so I kind of just had to buy one of each. Alrighty, got a few more bluegill profile baits to go through real quick, so we're just gonna run through them real fast. First up, we got this guy right here. This is an elude goonie gill. This is, again, one of those recent acquisitions for me. I haven't thrown this thing around or really seen anything about this bait. It's a collaboration between Elude Baits and Goonie Wolf, though. It's a little wake and crank, as you guys could probably imagine. Just a little like golden shiner profile right there, or at least that's the paint scheme that they went with. It's more of a bluegill profile, but they went with kind of like a golden shiner pattern on it. Regardless though, looks really sweet. I'm sure this thing is going to get bit. Again, just kind of like another ambiguous color profile, just kind of looks like a bait fish. So regardless of if you're trying to imitate like a shad or a bluegill or an alewife or a crappie or even a perch or something, like this would do a pretty good job of imitating it. Again, haven't thrown this thing around, haven't caught any fish on it yet, but really excited to throw it around, see what we can do with it in the spring. Again, it's not a bait that I know a whole ton about, but it is pretty interesting. One thing that I did notice is it has these little like scent chambers in the joint right there. It's got like these two little cutouts with like these little wire brushes in it, and apparently the idea is you can take like some scent and put it in there and it'll kind of seep out a little bit slower as opposed to just like putting it on the wood, I guess. I've never really seen anything like that before. I don't know of any baits that have like scent chambers in a hard-bodied swim bait like that, so that's a pretty interesting idea. But yeah, we're definitely going to throw this thing around the spring and summer, see what we can do with it. Alrighty, next up is a bait that I've actually had for a super long time, but hasn't really had any time to shine on my channel. This is a Hiroshima Baits Billrilla. So this is their wake version of the Gillrilla, which is obviously the same profile bait, but just doesn't have the bill in it. This is, again, their wake bait style version of it though. It's a cool little bait. It's a little bit of a chunkier style wake bait, but again, stays right up along the surface. Really, really cool little bait right there. This is, again, one of those baits that I've had my eye on for a super long time. I remember back before I even really knew what a swim bait was, I saw a picture of one of these things and was like, wow, that looks really, really cool. Fast forward a few years and I found one for a pretty solid little deal, so I picked it up a couple of years ago. I've caught probably 6 or 7 fish on it. It's usually been kind of a night fishing bait for me, as it's got a pretty loud thump to it. But it should also get bit low light hours, early in the morning, stuff like that. Also in like really dirty water, this should be a pretty solid bait as well. Just not something that I've thrown around on camera at all, so we're just gonna have to throw it around a little bit for you guys, show you all what we can do with the old Billrilla. Alrighty, next up we got this thing right here. If you guys know your swim baits, you probably know what this is. This is a Lanciotti Psycho Gill, but it's a really interesting one. This is actually a 1 of 6. So back in 2017 or 2018, Lanciotti did a Halloween run of some baits. This is one of their Halloween Psycho Gills. As you guys can see on this side, it just looks like a normal natural bluegill. The only thing that looks a little different is maybe the tail. It's got like these little frays in it, but if you flip it around to this side, it's actually got like a super sweet little zombified gill presentation on it. All beat up looking and bloody, really interesting. It's got that bright green eye on it also, so really cool profile, really cool presentation for a bait. I've obviously never seen a bait like this before, but when I saw it, and especially for the price that I saw it at, I had to pick it up. My buddy Joey was actually nice enough to sell this to me, so shout out to you, Joey. I've actually filmed a video with this thing for my first impressions. It was a Halloween video for you guys, so again, if you guys want to see that video, I'll leave it linked down below for y'all. But yeah, this is the Psycho Gill. Again, just like a wake and crank. A lot of these baits are going to be very similar, going 0 to 2 feet, so not really going to cover it. But yeah, just another one of those baits that's super well known. These things have a really, really hard thump on them. They almost feel like a chatterbait. One of the harder thumping wake baits that I own. I really, really like this thing. Again, it's just a little bit of a weird color profile with that whole zombified thing on it, but definitely gets bit, and we are certainly going to be throwing this thing around a whole bunch in the future. It's just a sweet little profile. You never see a bait like that. I've never seen a PG like this before, so when I saw that one for sale, you know I had to scoop it. And yeah, sweet little bait. Really excited to have this one in the arsenal. Again, big shout out to my buddy Joey for selling it to me, and really excited to catch some more fish on it. Alright, 2 more bluegill wakes that we got to go through real quick. We got this guy right here. This is the UFO bluegill wake. I don't know exactly what color they call that. I think it's just like a natural bluegill color, but super lifelike presentation. These UFO baits are some of the harder baits to get your hands on. I've seen them go for $300, $400, $500. Their big UFO motherships go for $500, $600, $700 sometimes. And they're really difficult to get your hands on. Very slender profile on these baits. I've seen people catching absolute giants on this thing all over the country, but especially in Florida. I think my buddy Dan actually has caught a double digit on this bait, so I was really excited to be able to get my hands on one. And yeah, they're incredibly lifelike looking baits. We're definitely going to have to throw this thing around. Again, just recently picked this thing up in my last little swim bait unboxing, so haven't gotten a chance to throw it around yet, but I know the reputation that these things have, and I'm sure it's going to get crushed for us. Well, sorry about that, folks. My GoPro died. It actually just ran out of battery, and then I checked the SD card and it was running out of space as well, so I figured we may as well just save the rest of this video for another day. So now it's like 2 or 3 days later. I ended up getting super busy with just a bunch of other stuff, so I didn't get a chance to actually finish filming this video up until now. But we got just a few more baits to go through, and then of course we're going to talk about the rods and reels as well, so we're just going to finish up the little wake bait section right here. These next 2 baits are going to be from the same company, both wake baits, just very different styles of wake baits. We're going to talk about this one first. This is the Throwback Baits Wake Walker. So you guys saw the flea shad. That was a newer bait that I picked up, but it's essentially the same bait as this, with the one main difference being obviously the Wake Walker has that bill, so it's more of a wake and crank style bait as opposed to the flea shad, which is more of just like a multi-jointed straight retrieve style bait. But regardless, you'd fish these baits pretty similarly. I might throw a couple of weight strips on that flea shad just to get it to be like a super slow sink, just because again it is a multi-jointed bait and I don't need like a floating multi-jointed bait per se, especially when I have this thing, which is essentially just a floating multi-jointed bait. It is, again, like I said, a wake and crank, but it does pretty much stay right up above the surface of the water. I've got it down to maybe like 1.5 feet on a long cast, but generally it stays up in that top part of the water column, which is super great for fishing over super shallow stuff, or if you're just trying to fish a top water bait. And yeah, I caught a bunch of fish on this wake walker this past year, which is obviously why I picked up the flea shad, as well as the next bait that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But yeah, really stoked to throw this thing around. One thing I don't think I mentioned is the paint color on this. So this is the SWIMBAIT Underground version. SWIMBAIT Underground and Throwback Baits actually did a collaboration where they did like these super realistic paint jobs on a couple of different baits. Or I guess I should say they did a couple of different paint jobs on the wake walkers. So they did this one, which is a bluegill one. They also had like a golden shiner one as well, which I considered picking up, but ended up going with the supernatural bluegill one, and this thing has been absolutely killer for me. But yeah, you guys will definitely be seeing this bait a lot more this coming year. I love throwing this thing around, and once it gets to those warmer water temperatures like 65 and up, we're definitely going to be throwing this thing around all summertime. Alrighty, also from Throwback Baits, we got this little thing right here. Again, Wagon style bait, but this is actually the Bad Bunny. This is the Christmas edition from this past year. I just recently picked this thing up, but it's an absolutely sweet little bait. This color is called Cosmic Brownie, so I guess they decided to imitate the galaxy for this one. But essentially, it's like a black base with a bunch of iridescent blue and purple in it, and then it's just got like this white splatter paint all the way across the top and all over the body and stuff. The belly of it's black. It's also got the carbon fiber lip in there, which I just wanted to pick up just because I think the carbon fiber is freaking sweet. Haven't gotten a chance to throw this bait around, but I'm really excited to throw it around this coming year. I can see this being an absolute killer night bait. It's a super loud bait. It's made out of wood, so it has a little bit of a louder clacking noise than like a resin bait. But yeah, again, super loud bait, should be perfect for low visibility, super dirty water, low light conditions, or again, like I said, night fishing. And yeah, really excited to throw that one around a little bit this coming spring and summer, see if we can catch a giant on it. Alrighty, and this last bait is also a fantastic night fishing bait. This is another bait from DRT. This is the Joker though. So the DRT Joker is their top water bait. It's very similar in shape, I guess, to the DRT Clash 9s and the Tiny Clashes, but as you guys can tell, it's a whole lot wider. It's also a whole lot louder. I'm sure you guys can barely hear me over all the rattles and stuff that's going on with this bait. But yeah, this bait is kind of just made for night fishing as far as I can tell, especially in this colorway. I don't know what they call that colorway, but it's friggin' sweet. It's like a Japanese only colorway. I'm, again, not really sure what they call it, but it's just like a black base with like these weird like purple and pink stripes on it. But yeah, super cool bait. Haven't had a chance to throw it around all that much, but I picked it up for super cheap, and I'm really excited to have it in the arsenal. I've only caught one fish on it so far, but again, I only paid like 60 bucks for it, so even if I only use it every once in a while, I'm pretty much okay with it just to have it in the arsenal. But yeah, just a super loud, super wide topwater bait. These things, again, very similar to the DRT Clashes, the Clash 9s and the Tiny Clashes, that is. The lip can come out. You can also change the tail on them, but really cool little bait right here. Again, really just designed for night fishing. It is incredibly loud. I'm just gonna give this thing a quick shake for you guys. But yeah, as you guys can hear, it's got a ton of rattles in it. It clicks really loud in that joint as well. When this thing goes across the water, it is crazy loud. Again, I've used it a couple of times. You can either walk it like a spook on top of the water, or you can just reel it like a wake bait. Again, very versatile bait. That's kind of DRT's thing, is making very versatile baits. And yeah, not a bait that I throw around all too much, but definitely one that I'm stoked to have in the arsenal. And we'll definitely have to throw this thing around a little bit more this coming year, see if we can get a giant on it, because I've seen some people catch some absolute giant fish on this bait. But yeah, that wraps up all of the baits. Now we're going to get into the rods and reels. We got 4 swim bait rods and reels. I got a couple other rods that I use to throw like some of the smaller finessier swim baits, but we're not going to cover those in this video. That'll be its own separate video. I'll be doing a 2024 rod and reel arsenal video at some point coming up, but I've got a new rod and reel that I'm waiting on to get, so we're going to have to wait for them to get here to do that video. But yeah, these are going to be all my swim bait specific rods. Like I said, we got 4 of them, so we're just going to wrap the video up real quick. I'm going to tell you about each of the rods, each of the reels that's on the rods, as well as the kind of line that I use on all of them. But yeah, I figure we may as well go from my smallest rod and kind of work our way up. Smallest in terms of both length as well as size reel that's on here. But we're going to start with this little guy. This is a 7'5", so it's pretty small for a swim bait rod. But this is an older rod. It's a Phoenix M1. This is a 1 to 5 ounce bait rod. Again, 7'5", so when I first picked this thing up, I honestly thought it was going to be like a frogging stick. But I saw the lure rating on it. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, it's 1 to 6 ounces, but I would never throw anything over like 4 ounces on this rod. But regardless, I looked at the lure rating and realized that it was actually a swim bait rod. And ever since then, I've been using it for a bunch of like smaller swim baits, anything from like 2 ounces or even down to 1.5 ounces, all the way up to probably about 3.5, 4 ounces. I'll throw the Wake Walker on this thing. I'll throw the Clash 9s on it. You could probably throw the Tiny Clash on it as well. I just haven't gotten a chance to take the Tiny Clash out and try it on this rod. But yeah, you can throw a good amount of baits on this rod. I think most of the big glide baits that you see on the market are generally in between that like 3 to 4 ounce range anyway, so perfect little rod for those. And it's a great little rod for if you're fishing around cover. That's why I usually find myself throwing DRT Clash 9. Again, we'll probably be throwing the Tiny Clash on this thing as well at some point in the near future, but this is again a really great rod for throwing around cover. If you're fishing docks or like really heavy stick ups or laydowns or something like that, and you want something to be able to like pitch and flip a bait into something really, really tight, this is a great rod for doing that with a big bait. A lot of swim bait rods generally tend to be like over 7.5 feet long, 7'8", 7'9", 7'10", 8 foot. I know some people who use 8.5 or 9 foot swim bait rods, which is a crazy long rod. So yeah, saying a 7'5" swim bait rod isn't something you see every day, but really sweet little rod regardless. I picked this thing up for like 120 bucks secondhand, so really great little rod for the price. And I've got it paired up with one of my only, actually I think this is my only Daiwa reel. This is a Daiwa Coastal. It's the older Coastal, it's the 200 size. So it's a little bit heavier duty, a little bit bigger than the newer 150 size ones, made for a little bit heavier of a bait. People use this thing for big swim baits. People use it for saltwater fishing, as you can imagine with it being called the Coastal. It is actually a saltwater reel. But I know a lot of people have these things, absolutely love them for big swim baits. I picked mine up for like 60 or 70 bucks less than what they normally retail for. I think I bought mine for like 150 bucks or something like that. And yeah, it's been a pretty solid little reel for me. Again, I'm not really a Daiwa fan, as you guys will be able to tell with all the rest of my swim bait rods. I'm really a Shimano guy. Most of my rods have Shimano reels on them. That all being said though, this Coastal is a pretty sweet little reel. Again, if I'm going to have one Daiwa, this is probably one of the ones that I'd want to get my hands on. There are a couple other models that I might consider picking up in the future, but for right now, this is my one and only, and it's a pretty sweet one. And on here, as well as on the next 2 swim bait rods, I have 20-pound fluorocarbon. The only rod that I have anything different on is the really big one, which is 30-pound monofilament, but we'll get there in a minute. But yeah, talking about other rods, this is the next one up. This is my newest acquisition and probably my favorite rod that I currently own. This thing is absolutely sweet. So it's an MC Custom Rods. This is a rod that I picked up, again, secondhand from a buddy. But it's a fantastic feeling rod, a fantastic looking rod. This is the first custom rod I've ever owned. Obviously, I didn't get it custom made for me, but it is a custom made rod. It's got the little spiral wrap or the acid wrap guides on there, which I'm sure you guys can't really see, but they are spiral wrapped up the rod, which is pretty sweet. First rod I've ever had with spiral wrap guides on it. And again, I picked this combo up pretty recently. I only got it in like November, so only managed to catch one fish on it, but as far as I can tell, it's a fantastic combo. Both the rod as well as the reel are absolutely dialed. And while we're talking about it, we may as well talk about the reel. This is the Shimano Antares Monster Drive, one of the most famous or infamous big bait reels, at least the 200 size big bait reels that you can get. This is the older version of the Monster Drive. They also have a newer one that they just recently redesigned, but I was actually able to pick this thing up for like the price of a Corrado DC, so I figured for like 250, 260 bucks, I may as well grab myself a Monster Drive. And again, this whole setup was used. I got everything secondhand. The Monster Drive's a little bit loud, but overall, fantastic rod. It outperforms all of my other setups by a crazy amount. And I believe that this rod is rated anywhere from 2 to 8 ounces. It doesn't have the rod specs on it anywhere, but I think it's rated for 2 to 8 ounces. It's a 710 or a 711 or something like that. Not quite 8 foot, but just about getting there. And overall, I am loving this rod. It's super light, super balanced. Again, you can throw baits all the way from like a Clash 9 all the way up to like a 250 if you really wanted to on this rod. It would handle it just fine. Again, this is a 200 size reel, so I'll probably be throwing most of my like normal size glide baits, some of my smaller wake baits and stuff on this rod as well. But overall, fantastic setup, looks incredible, performs even better. I'm so excited to have this thing in the arsenal and can't wait to catch some more fish on it this coming spring. Alrighty, and these last two rods are actually very similar, even though they don't really look it. They're both Daiwa DX SB rods. They're the same rod, just two different models. This one is the 2 to 8 ounce model, so again, just like for anything within like that 2 to 8 ounce range. This is my 300 size setup. I've got the 300 Shimano Scorpion on here. This is the Scorpion MD, so it's got the bigger handles on it. Or sorry, I should say it's the MD LH version, which is the one with the large handles on it. Came with these upgraded, like heavier knobs that are a little bit bigger and a little bit nicer than the normal stock knobs. I've had this reel for pretty much 2 years now. I absolutely love this thing. I've used it a whole bunch, caught a ton of fish on it. It's usually what I'm throwing most of my wake baits on is this setup, as well as a bunch of my larger glide baits. I also use this rod for like big soft baits, so I'll throw the Citizen on this. I could probably throw like a smaller mag draft on it if I really wanted to, but honestly I'll probably just throw like the Citizen and then a couple other baits on it coming up. But this has mainly become my wake bait setup. Like I said, I throw a ton of wake baits, a ton of like 3.5, 4 ounce wake baits, and this setup handles them beautifully. And again, this has got 20-pound fluorocarbon on here. Again, I'm mostly throwing either like a big soft bait, a big glide bait, or a big wake bait on this thing. I actually like to throw my wake baits on either monofilament or fluorocarbon. I don't like straight braid. I noticed that I set the hook kind of hard, so if I can throw something with a little bit more stretch in it, I will generally do that. And fluorocarbon just seems like the most applicable line for all the situations that I'll be using this reel for, since I don't want to have to constantly keep pulling offline and putting new line on this thing, wasting a bunch of money that way. I may as well just use one kind of line that I can use for everything that I'm throwing. And if you guys might notice, these grips out here, bright red, are not the stock grips. I actually did these myself. If you guys want to check that video out, I did like a rod modification video a couple of videos ago. I'll leave that link down below for you guys if you want to go see that. But yeah, decided to throw some red grips on here just to kind of complement the red little accents on the Shimano Scorpion. So that's pretty freaking sweet. I also did that on the next combo that you guys will see here in a second. But yeah, this is a 300 size reel. I used to use this thing for pretty much everything. As I've gotten the smaller 200 size reels and noticed that throwing glide baits on them is a little bit more fun and a little bit more effective, I've started moving most of my glide bait fishing over to the smaller 200 size reels. But yeah, this thing will mainly be a wake bait rod or like a big soft bait rod. You guys will definitely be seeing this thing on the channel coming up here in the future. And my last swim bait rod in the arsenal is the big boy. This is my 400 size setup. Again, it's the Daiwa DX SB rod. This is the 3 to 10 ounce version. I don't use this rod a whole bunch. I got it. This was actually my first swim bait setup. When I didn't know what I was doing, I just went out and bought a swim bait rod. I got the 3 to 10 ounce bait rod and then the 400 size Scorpion, or the 400 size Trank, sorry. Looking back on it, it probably would have been good to get like a 300 or a 200 size Tranks to start off with, but again, I didn't know what I was doing back in the day, so I was like, oh, everybody throws the Tranks, I may as well get the biggest Tranks that they have and throw it on the biggest setup that I have and then go try and throw some big baits on it. As of right now though, I'm only using this for like 1 or 2 baits here and there. I'm planning on getting some really big wake baits coming up here in the spring and summer, so hopefully we'll be able to throw a few more baits around on this thing, but this is pretty much just a rod for the mother at this point. And then I think I have like 1 or 2 really big soft baits that I might consider throwing on this rod, but I feel like I could probably get away with throwing them on the 300 size rod, so I probably will. But yeah, this is an absolute beast of a rod. Again, we did a little bit of a modification on the grips there, did a little bit of a DR CRT style spiral wrap on there. Again, that's also in that video if you guys want to go check that out. I'll leave a link down below for you guys, like I said. And yeah, like I said as well, we also have that paired up with the 400 size Shimano Tranx with 30-pound monofilament on that. Again, I like the monofilament just because it's got a little bit more stretch, and when you're throwing something as big as the Mother or any of these giant like 7+ ounce baits, you want something with a little bit of stretch in it so you're not putting as much stress on that knot. Just to try and last a little bit longer before you break the bait off, because I feel like eventually I'm going to end up breaking that bait off, and it's going to be a really sad day for me. But to try and stop that from happening for as long as possible, I use super heavy line, use monofilament, tie a really good knot, and always double check it, obviously. And yeah, this is the big beefy setup. This is the broomstick, the biggest one that I have for throwing the biggest baits that I have. One thing that I forgot to mention actually is the Gomex's handles on here. This is the Tranx 400 HG, like I said, and a lot of them have the option to come with the big mono power handle with that massive big knob on it. I thought I would like that. I didn't actually end up liking it as much as I thought I would, so decided to pick up some of these Gomex's handles secondhand. Just a flat black color, just something that would fit my hand a little bit better. Again, that big power handle, it's great for if you're fishing in like saltwater, but if you're just doing like normal bass fishing, that big power handle is not the best. But yeah, with that, I think that pretty much wraps up my swim bait arsenal. You guys have officially seen every single swim bait that I have, more or less, every single rod, every single reel. We've gone over all the baits, most of the specs, I think. And now comes the really fun part for me, which is the editing part. This is gonna take frickin' forever, so I'm gonna get started on that. Really hope you guys enjoyed today's video though. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see some more content from me. As you guys can tell, we're gonna have a ton of swim bait content coming up here, so hopefully you guys are looking forward to that coming up this next year. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for me. I'll check them and wreck them, and I'll catch you on the next one. I'm out. Peace.